What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in today's video, I'm going to be going through some of my top buy low and sell high trade targets after week 9 before week 10 of the NFL season. If you guys enjoyed the video, smash that like button, subscribe. Any questions, trade questions, waiver wire, feel free to drop them down below. But let's just dive right into my first buy low player here. We're going to start off at the running back position, and it is going to be Breeland Hall. He's coming off of back-to-back, somewhat underwhelming games. Not terrible, like didn't completely sink your lineup, but not what you're expecting out of Brees. 9.9 and 10.5 PPR points in his last two. Despite those, not so great last two games, I still think Brees is like locked into that very, very deep RB1 tier. The top running backs are just, aplenty this season. I think from running back 1 through like running back 11, 12, they're very tough to order. And I still think that Brees is very firmly in that area. Even though on the season he's a mid-tier running back 2, I still think he's a candidate to be the running back 1 overall rest of season. Over the past 4 games, we have seen Brees have kind of a rushing efficiency resurgence. He really struggled early on in the season, was delivering some very inefficient games. Weeks 1 through 5, he was only averaging 3 yards per carry. From week 6 through 9, he is up to 5 yards per carry. He has been very involved as a pass catcher. Last 2 weeks haven't been great, but the targets have still been fine. But he is currently second in running back targets per game. And I also just think at this point, he is due for some positive touchdown regression. So even though the rushing efficiency has kind of been bumped up over the last few weeks, he has only scored 1 touchdown in the last 6 games. That's just unlucky at that point. Those touchdowns are going to come. So he has the receiving upside. The rushing is bouncing back to kind of what we expected heading into the season. And I think he is due for an increase in the touchdown department. So I think if you can flip one of those other running backs within like that mid-tier RB1 area for Brees Hall and then get an upgrade somewhere else, either at another running back spot, wide receiver, quarterback, tight end, that is something I'd be willing to do. Because like I said, I do still think that Brees Hall can be a high-end running back 1 rest of season. I'm not going to be like banking on it because there is so much competition up there, but I don't think he's like way less likely than some of those other top dudes. So Brees Hall, like him as a buy low. I also like 2 players from the same offense, both pass catchers. The first one is going to be Brian Thomas Jr. Rough game in week 9, 2 receptions for 22 yards. Have to imagine a part of it was that he was a game time decision dealing with his chest injury. But despite this rough week 9, I still really like the outlook for Brian Thomas Jr. rest of season. He's a rookie wide receiver who has already flashed potential like fantasy wide receiver 1 upside. Before week 9, he had 15 plus PPR points in 4 of his last 5 games. He had 21 plus points in 3 out of those 5. I just think you look at this environment offensively, the Jaguars defense is allowing 28 points per game. The passing volume is going to be there. They're going to be trailing. It's going to be favorable game scripts for these pass catchers. You have Christian Kirk, who's out for the season. So I think there's going to be passing volume for Brian Thomas Jr. This is going to be a pass catcher-friendly offense rest of season. And with Brian Thomas Jr. already flashing the talent, I do think he could be a potential wide receiver 1 rest of season, potential back-end wide receiver 1, fringe wide receiver 1. And I think in terms of like ranking him, he'd probably be a high-end wide receiver 2 for me. And I think his floor is, somewhere in the wide receiver 2 area. So I think he's a nice buy low, and I do think he's in a great spot moving forward. Then the other guy from that offense, we have Evan Ingram. And a lot of what I said about Brian Thomas Jr. also applies to Ingram. Potential pass-heavy game scripts, no Christian Kirk. But the no Christian Kirk thing is a massive deal for Evan Ingram because we have a pretty solid sample size from 2023 with Evan Ingram just completely dominating without Christian Kirk. So the last 6 games of the season, no Christian Kirk for this Jags offense. Evan Ingram averaged 19.3 PPR points per game. The dude was on an absolute tear without Christian Kirk in the lineup. He didn't have a huge game today without Kirk, but he still led the team with 10 targets. The volume is going to be there for Evan Ingram, and I do think probably close to worst case scenario, obviously barring an injury to him or T-Law. I think he has a floor of like mid-tier tight end 1 rest of season, and I would not be shocked if he was a top 3, maybe even the tight end 1 rest of season, just based on the situation with no Christian Kirk. And then my final buy low player here is going to be Tyrone Tracy, coming off a down game, suffered a concussion last week, cleared concussion protocol, 66 rushing yards, 1 reception for 3 yards, 0 touchdowns, only 7.9 PPR points. But what I liked out of this performance from Tracy was that he still had the clear running back 1 usage, 72% snap share, 55% route participation. He took 16 of the 23 running back carries, and we now have a 5-game sample size of Tracy as the starter. He is averaging 15.4 carries and 3 targets per game, 14.8 PPR points per game. I think he is a locked-in running back 2 rest of season. He also has a very, very favorable upcoming schedule. So if you're someone who needs that boost for the playoffs, you're making that playoff push, you're like right on the outside, you need some wins here. He has 4 straight very, very soft matchups. He plays the Panthers, Bucks, Cowboys, and Saints. So I think Tracy is going to be a very strong play, at least for the, next few games. But I also think he'll be fine even when he gets into some of the tougher matchups in the playoffs. I think he'll still be a running back 2. This is only his second full year playing the position. The fact that he's come in and been so productive in the NFL, it's a great sign. Brian Daboll seems to really like him. He's producing. I like him as a buy low here. And then shifting into just a couple of sell highs. The first sell high I want to talk about is Chuba Hubbard. And I think this is an interesting spot for Chuba because he has had an amazing season so far. If you drafted him the later rounds, he has been a complete smash pick. He's pretty much been locked in running back 2, running back 1 for a stretch there with Dalton. He's averaging 15.3 PPR points per game. He's coming off a 21.1 PPR point game, by far his best game with Bryce Young at quarterback. And it's not like he's just getting force-fed volume and is an inefficient option. He's 7th in rushing yards over expected per attempt. So he has been a legit good real-life NFL running back and a very good fantasy running back. But it does seem like Jonathan Brooks is going to make his debut in Week 10. And admittedly, I was someone who was really high on Jonathan Brooks heading into the season. It seemed like his medicals were trending in the right direction, got pushed back to him being on PUP, and then the injury just kept pushing and pushing and pushing. And so as someone who was in on Brooks, I've already taken the L on that one. It was a bad call. I mean, at some point I was worried that he might not even play this season. But I think even as someone who is admitting that Brooks is not going to be a great redraft pick, I still think at the very least he is going to be a small inconvenience to Chuba Hubbard. And I think he has the potential to push for a pretty decent committee here on a bad offense, which would be pretty brutal to Chuba's value. So here's my take on the Jonathan Brooks kind of potential usage here. I think right out of the gate, he is going to be very ready to go, meaning that on a contending team, if the Panthers had any shot at making the playoffs, I think he probably could have been back a few weeks ago. Seems like they were taking it very, very slow. Obviously, he's a rookie coming off a torn ACL. Why are you going to rush him back to a team that's, not in contention at this point? And I'm not expecting Brooks to come in and take over the backfield, even in a few weeks. Maybe it happens, but that's certainly not something I'm banking on. But I do think he'll take a fine role within this offense. Why even play him if you're just going to give him the 5 opportunities that Miles Sanders has been getting? At that point, you should probably just redshirt him. So I think he'll carve out a fine role. I do think he has the potential to take some of the valuable opportunities. Fairly big back, could work in on the goal line. Not saying he's going to completely overtake it, but could get some opportunities there. He's a very good pass catcher. Could kind of, carve out some work in that department. And I think we're in this spot where if Bryce Young remains the starter, which is possible after he picked up the win against the Saints, a split with Bryce Young at quarterback between Chuba and Jonathan Brooks could really be a bad sign for Chuba's fantasy value. So even if you're someone who's optimistic that he's going to hold on to that starting spot, I would still rather just pivot to one of these running backs that I think are much more established within their offenses and I think have a better shot of just maintaining a workhorse or very strong role. So some of the potential trade targets I'd be looking for, I think James Conner's interesting, David Montgomery, Chase Brown, that might be unlikely after his monster game. Tony Pollard, I think Tyrone Tracy, who I talked about as a buy low, Ramondre Stevenson. These would just be a bunch of names that I'd be throwing out offers for. Not saying all of them are going to get accepted, but worth a shot throwing out those darts on those players. And then the other sell high option for me is going to be Jackson Smith and Jigba. May seem obvious after his monster game. I mean, the dude went 7 for 180 and 2 touchdowns. And it was fun to see. I like JSN as a prospect. Thought he was an interesting fantasy pick this season. But this huge game really doesn't alter a ton of how I view him rest of season. Prior to this week, JSN had one single game over 14 PPR points. He had been a fine wide receiver 3 flex option, but just had very, very little upside week to week. And he finally had one of these huge boom games. But is that something we're going to expect moving forward? DK Metcalf likely back after the bye. I feel like he's probably going to slip back into that wide receiver 3 flex area. Maybe I'm wrong, but I just don't know if like midway through a second season in this one huge game is all of a sudden going to ignite him to be like a top 24 wide receiver week to week. So that's my take. Some potential targets I'll throw out there. I think Josh Downs looks like a clear wide receiver one for the Colts. He's interesting. Lad McConkey clearly breaking out here with the Chargers. Justin Herbert's wide receiver one. Jacoby Myers doesn't necessarily seem like a super flashy pickup, but with Devontae Adams out, he's just been a wildly consistent option. And I think Tank Dell's also interesting. Obviously, Stephon Diggs out for the year. Even with Nico Collins coming back, I still think Tank Dell can be productive. But that's going to wrap it up for some of my buy low and sell high players. Let me know your thoughts down below. Any questions, drop them, and I'll make sure to get back to you as soon as I can. But thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.